I remember that day vividly, like a scene replaying in my mind on a loop. It started like any other Thursday. The sun streamed through our kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the breakfast table where I sat, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone. I was half listening to the morning news when my eyes drifted toward the pile of mail on the counter. It was an ordinary pile: bills, junk, and a few letters that had been lingering there for days. As I reached for the mail, something caught my attention. Emily's phone, which she had left charging on the counter. I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy, but an instinctive curiosity nagged at me. After all, she had been acting a little distant lately, often buried in her work and returning home later than usual. The thought flitted through my mind that maybe I was just being paranoid, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me alone. With a glance over my shoulder, I picked up her phone. It was unlocked, something I found odd. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of my intentions sinking in, but my curiosity overwhelmed my better judgment. I opened her messaging app and my heart raced as I scrolled through the conversations. That's when I found it. Messages between Emily and her colleague, Mark, flooded the screen. They were filled with laughter, shared secrets, and an alarming number of "I miss US." My hands trembled as I read their exchanges. Flirtatious banter that escalated into something far more troubling. The final blow was a message that left no room for doubt. "I can't wait to be with you tonight. It's our little secret." The world around me blurred, and the comforting morning light felt suddenly oppressive. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing, the reality of her betrayal slamming into me like a freight train. Every fond memory of our life together began to crumble, replaced by an avalanche of doubt and pain. Panic surged through me as I grappled with the crushing weight of my emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief, it all swirled in a chaotic storm within me. I had trusted Emily implicitly. We had built a life together, and I had believed we were happy. Now, I was faced with the harsh reality of her deception. I felt like a stranger in my own home, the walls closing in around me. I dropped the phone onto the table, staring at it as if it held the answers to questions I didn't even want to ask. How could she do this to me? To us? I couldn't just sit there and let this go unanswered. I needed to do something. The thought of confronting her rushed into my mind, but what would I say? Would it be best to confront her directly, to demand answers? Or was it wiser to gather more information first, to understand the full extent of her betrayal before facing her? My mind raced as I paced around the kitchen. I felt like a detective in a thriller novel, caught between the instinct to confront the perpetrator and the need to gather evidence. I had to know everything. How long had this been going on? What were her feelings for him? That's when I remembered my skills in programming. I had spent years honing my abilities, developing software, hacking systems, and navigating the labyrinth of digital information. A dark thought took root in my mind. Instead of seeking justice through confrontation, I could take control in my way. I could gather evidence, expose her, and let the truth unravel her carefully constructed lies. As I made this decision, a wave of cold determination washed over me. The pain was still there, but it had transformed into something else, fuel for the fire of my revenge. I would not allow myself to be a passive victim in this twisted narrative. I would become the author of my own story, and Emily would learn the consequences of her choices. I glanced once more at her phone, my mind racing with possibilities. I was entering a dangerous game, one that would change everything. But for now, all I could think about was the truth I had uncovered and the reckoning that was coming. In the days following my discovery, a storm of emotions churned within me. The initial shock of Emily's betrayal had morphed into a fiery rage that consumed my thoughts, driving me toward a singular focus: revenge. As I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I found myself crafting elaborate scenarios in my mind, each more elaborate than the last, each feeding my growing obsession. The thrill of revenge felt intoxicating, like a drug that coursed through my veins, heightening every nerve and amplifying every desire to take action. As I sat in front of my computer, the familiar hum of the machine brought me a strange sense of comfort. I had spent countless hours here, immersed in the world of coding and technology, lost in the challenges of programming. Now, however, the screen in front of me transformed into something much darker. It became a weapon, my weapon. I couldn't shake the images of Emily and Mark from my mind, the laughter they shared, the intimacy they had forged while I was obliviously living my life. Believing everything was fine. The thought of confronting her in person made me uneasy. I knew I would be met with tears and apologies, with attempts to justify her actions. I didn't want her remorse. I wanted her to understand the full scope of the consequences of her choices. It was clear to me that a confrontation wouldn't satisfy the raging storm inside me. No, I wanted to do something far more calculated and precise. I wanted to expose her, unravel the fabric of her life, and show her the consequences of her betrayal. The idea of using my programming skills to hack into her electronic devices was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had the power to uncover everything, to bring her secret life crashing down around her. I pulled up a chair and logged into my computer, feeling the adrenaline rush as I navigated through the familiar landscapes of code and data. I had always loved the thrill of solving complex problems, and now I had an entirely new puzzle to piece together. My mind raced as I plotted my course of action. First, I needed access to Emily's devices. Her phone and laptop were my primary targets. I knew her passwords, or at least I thought I did. I had paid attention to her habits over the years, noted the names of our pets and favorite bands, and even the special dates she often referenced. But I needed more than just a hunch. I had to be methodical. I decided to start with her phone. It had been so easily accessible before, but now I needed a plan. I would create a program to exploit a vulnerability in the phone's security features. It was risky, but I felt a rush of power at the thought of being able to see everything hidden from me. Every text, every call, every digital trace of her betrayal. In my mind, I envisioned myself delving into her messages, unearthing every sordid detail of her affair with Mark. I would lay bare their exchanges, the stolen moments they had shared, and any incriminating evidence that would expose the facade she had built around our lives. I would become the puppeteer, pulling the strings and watching as her carefully constructed world fell apart. The more I thought about it, the more emboldened I felt. This was my chance to regain control, to turn the tables on the situation. I envisioned the moment I would reveal the evidence, Emily's face as she realized what I had done, the shock and horror mingling in her eyes. I wanted her to know that I had seen everything, that I had orchestrated her downfall from the shadows. But beneath the exhilaration lurked a darker fear. Would this path truly satisfy my thirst for justice, or would it lead to more pain? As I wrote the first lines of code, I tried to push those thoughts aside. I reminded myself that this wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity and proving to myself that I wouldn't be a victim of her choices. With each keystroke, I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer the hurt husband wallowing in despair. I was the architect of my fate, ready to dismantle the illusion Emily had crafted. The thought fueled my determination, drowning out any lingering doubts. As the hours passed, I delved deeper into the technical details. Feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. I knew the risks and the potential consequences of what I was doing, but the fire of betrayal burned brighter than any cautionary whisper in my mind. I was committed now, and I wouldn't stop until I had exacted my revenge. I was entering uncharted territory, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. I was ready to embrace the darkness that lay ahead, fueled by the certainty that I would uncover the truth and bring it crashing down on the very person who had shattered my world. Revenge was no longer just a thought, it was a mission. And I was ready to see it through to the end. As the days turned into weeks, my obsession with Emily's betrayal deepened. The anger that had fueled my desire for revenge began to morph into a meticulous planning process. This was no longer just a knee-jerk reaction to heartbreak, it was a calculated strategy, and I intended to execute it flawlessly. I had transformed my feelings of betrayal into a covert project, one that required stealth, patience, and cunning. Each day, I became more adept at navigating the complexities of hacking, drawing upon the skills I had honed throughout my career in programming and cybersecurity. My heart raced with adrenaline each time I thought about the information I was about to uncover. I had to start by gathering as much intelligence as possible about Emily's habits and routines. I began to observe her more closely, paying attention to the little things I had once taken for granted. Every morning, Emily would reach for her phone as soon as she woke up, scrolling through messages and notifications while still lying in bed. I noticed the way she typed, and the speed and familiarity with which she navigated her apps. It was a small window into her life, one that I intended to exploit. I also began to jot down potential passwords based on my observations. Emily had always used names and dates that held significance for her. I recalled our pets' names, our anniversary, and even the name of her favorite vacation spot. I felt like a detective piecing together clues. It was thrilling, and with each new detail, I felt more empowered. To further gather intelligence, I decided to set up an inconspicuous monitoring system on my own devices. I created a small application that would help me analyze patterns in her digital behavior. Whenever she would leave her laptop open or her phone unattended, I would take a quick mental note of her activities. I installed software that tracked her online habits and analyzed the frequency of her logins to various accounts. It felt like a game of chess, where I had to anticipate her moves while remaining 2 steps ahead. As I delved deeper into my preparations, I began to contemplate the moral implications of my actions. However, each time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the hurt and betrayal that had driven me to this point. I was no longer just a husband, I was an avenger, determined to reclaim my dignity and expose the truth. After a week of careful observation, I felt ready to take the next step. My goal was to obtain Emily's phone and laptop passwords without raising any suspicion. I would need a window of opportunity, an unguarded moment when I could access her devices without her knowing. The plan was risky, but the thrill of anticipation surged through me as I thought about the power I would soon wield. The night had arrived, cloaked in the anonymity that my actions required. I had waited until Emily fell asleep, her soft breathing echoing in the quiet of our bedroom. The darkness enveloped the room, creating a comforting veil that allowed me to move with purpose. I tiptoed into the living room, where Emily's laptop rested on the coffee table. It was open, and the screen illuminated the room with a pale glow. My heart raced as I approached, the adrenaline pulsing through my veins. I could feel the weight of the moment, everything I had worked toward was finally within reach. I quickly glanced back toward the bedroom, ensuring she was still asleep, before sitting down at the table. I opened the laptop and took a deep breath. Now was the moment of truth. I had anticipated this for days, and now it was time to put my plans into action. I knew I needed to focus and act quickly. I typed in the passwords I had compiled over the past week, starting with the most obvious ones: our anniversary, the name of our dog, and her favorite vacation spot. With each failed attempt, my heart sank a little deeper, but I refused to give up. I could feel the urgency of the situation. This was my only chance. Finally, on the 4th try, I hit the jackpot. The screen flickered as the laptop unlocked, and I could hardly believe my eyes. I had done it. I was in. The feeling of triumph was intoxicating. I quickly began to search through her files, feeling like an intruder in a space that was once so familiar to me. I navigated to her messages, opening the application to find a trove of conversations between her and Mark. My stomach twisted as I read their exchanges. They were filled with flirtation, longing, and unfiltered emotions that painted a vivid picture of their illicit affair. But I wasn't done yet. I opened her photo library, and what I found sent chills down my spine. There, hidden among the innocent pictures of family vacations and candid moments, were compromising photographs of Emily and Mark. They were intimate, stolen moments that captured their betrayal in stark detail. My breath hitched as I scrolled through image after image, each one a dagger to my heart. This was the evidence I needed, proof of their affair that would shatter their lives. As I continued my search, I felt a mix of exhilaration and revulsion. I was the architect of this exposure, and yet I was still tethered to the pain of what I was discovering. It was surreal, knowing that I was holding the power to destroy their lives with a few keystrokes. With every file I uncovered, I felt a rush of adrenaline that mingled with the bitterness of betrayal. I realized I was at a turning point. I could unleash this truth upon them, but it wouldn't bring back the love and trust I had lost. Instead, it would leave a path of destruction in its wake. But for now, the thrill of victory drowned out those thoughts. I was ready to move forward, to put my plan into action and watch as their world unraveled. I had the evidence I needed, and with it, I felt like I had finally regained control. The game was no longer about Emily and Mark's love story, it was about me reclaiming my narrative. I was no longer a victim. I was a force to be reckoned with, and soon, they would both understand the weight of their choices. With the compromising evidence in my possession, the thrill of victory mingled with a sense of foreboding. I had meticulously gathered the tools necessary to dismantle Emily's carefully constructed life, and now it was time to implement my plan. I felt like a conductor preparing to orchestrate a symphony of chaos, each note designed to bring about the collapse of their world. I began drafting my strategy for making the evidence public, wanting to ensure that the impact would be swift and far-reaching. The goal was simple: expose their affair in a way that would leave no room for denial or escape. I needed to create a viral post that would spread like wildfire across social media, drawing in as many eyes as possible. To maintain my anonymity, I created a series of fake social media accounts. I chose names that felt generic yet plausible, identities that wouldn't draw attention. I knew I had to keep my distance while still ensuring the message was heard loud and clear. The accounts would allow me to act as a whistleblower, a faceless source shedding light on the darkness that Emily and Mark had hidden away. With the accounts set up, I meticulously crafted my post. I knew it needed to grab attention immediately. I began with a catchy headline: "The Hidden Affairs of a Beloved Community Figure." I used a combination of emotive language and shocking claims to draw readers in. My goal was to make it feel like a scandal that could not be ignored, one that demanded investigation and discussion. I attached the most damning photographs and snippets of their conversations, ensuring that the evidence was undeniable. I wrote a brief introduction explaining who I was, a concerned citizen, while carefully omitting any personal details that could be traced back to me. My fingers danced over the keyboard as I finalized the post, my heart racing with the thought of what was about to unfold. Once everything was in place, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. This was the moment I had prepared for, and I knew there was no turning back. I hit the post button, and as the screen flashed in response, I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. In that instant, I experienced a wave of exhilaration mixed with anxiety. I was an architect of chaos, and I had just laid the foundation for a scandal that would reverberate throughout our community. As I refreshed the page, my heart raced at the thought of what was to come. It didn't take long for the post to begin its viral journey. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. People were shocked, incredulous, and eager to share the scandalous news with their networks. The notifications chimed like a symphony of destruction as my carefully crafted message spread beyond what I could have imagined. I watched, almost in a trance, as the engagement numbers skyrocketed. Shares multiplied rapidly, and it felt as if the world had suddenly turned its gaze toward Emily and Mark. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers were dissecting their relationships with a fervor that both thrilled and terrified me. The initial shock quickly turned into outrage as more and more people reacted to the revelations. "How could she? I can't believe you would do this." The comments echoed through the digital ether, fueling the fire of scandal. My heart raced with each new reaction. I knew that Emily and Mark would soon be at the center of a storm they could not escape. Their reputations, once so carefully maintained, were crumbling before my eyes. As I observed the fallout, a mix of emotions washed over me. On one hand, I felt empowered, relishing the chaos I had unleashed. This was my revenge, my way of turning the tables and forcing them to face the consequences of their actions. But beneath that surface excitement, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice of doubt that whispered through my mind. Was this really what I wanted? Was I becoming the very thing I despised? But those thoughts were drowned out by the rising tide of reactions. News outlets began picking up the story, further amplifying the reach of my post. Journalists called it a scandal of the year, and I felt a twisted satisfaction knowing that I had orchestrated this chaos. It was exhilarating to witness how quickly the public's opinion shifted, turning them against Emily and Mark, whom they had once admired. I could only imagine the conversation taking place in our home. Did she suspect me? Would she know that I had played a hand in this? The thought of her face as she scrolled through the comments and saw the evidence would be a moment I savored. I imagined Mark's embarrassment, his reputation shattered overnight, his career hanging by a thread. As the hours passed, I became entranced by the live updates on the post. Each notification felt like a surge of validation, a confirmation that I was not just a passive victim but a force to be reckoned with. Emily and Mark were now subject to the whims of public opinion, their lives dissected in a way they had never anticipated. The power I felt was intoxicating. I was no longer just Tom, the hurt husband. I was an avenger, a puppet master pulling the strings of their downfall. It was time for them to face the truth, and I was the one who had set the wheels in motion. As the night wore on, I felt an odd sense of calm settling in. The chaos I had unleashed would reverberate long after the initial shock faded. I had made my mark, and there was no turning back. I was ready to watch the fallout, to witness the unraveling of their lives, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction in knowing I had orchestrated it all. The following days unfolded like a haunting movie reel, each scene more dramatic than the last. The repercussions of my actions rippled through the community like an unstoppable wave, crashing into the lives of Emily and Mark with a ferocity I had not fully anticipated. I found myself glued to my phone, refreshing social media feeds and news sites, desperately seeking updates on the fallout from the scandal I had unleashed. It didn't take long for the reality of their situation to set in. Emily, once a shining star in her corporate world, faced swift and merciless consequences. I watched as news articles reported that she had been suspended from her job, pending an internal investigation. The headlines were relentless, portraying her as a pariah, a woman whose betrayal had not only shattered her marriage but also dismantled her professional reputation. Each article felt like a dagger, piercing through the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for years. I could only imagine the turmoil she experienced in the sterile environment of her workplace. The hushed whispers, the averted gazes, and the unspoken judgment that filled the air. I replayed our last conversations in my mind, the trivial disputes that had seemed so significant at the time. Now, it all felt trivial compared to the magnitude of her betrayal and the chaos it had spawned. Mark was not spared from the repercussions either. Reports began circulating about disciplinary actions being taken against him at work. He had been put on administrative leave, and whispers of possible termination loomed over him like a dark cloud. I relished the thought of his career unraveling, the position he had built through hard work and dedication now threatened by the weight of public disgrace. It was ironic, I mused, that he had thought he could play with fire without getting burned. As their lives spiraled, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Initially, I had envisioned a sense of triumph, the sweet taste of revenge that would wash away the pain of betrayal. But now, as I observed their downfall, that feeling began to sour. I had expected the thrill of victory, but instead, I was left with a growing sense of detachment. The hatred I had clung to as fuel for my revenge began to fade, morphing into a profound emptiness. I would scroll through social media, absorbing every update, but instead of feeling vindicated, I found myself plagued by a gnawing sense of loss. I had unleashed chaos on their lives, but in doing so, I had also lost a part of myself. My anger had transformed into a void that threatened to swallow me whole. Each day brought more news of their struggles, and I could see the toll it was taking on them. Emily had once been vibrant and full of life, but now her demeanor was a shadow of its former self. Friends who had once supported her began to distance themselves, unable to reconcile the image they had of her with the reality of her actions. The isolation she must have felt would have been palpable, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. Mark, too, seemed to be crumbling under the weight of the scandal. His face appeared gaunt in the few images I managed to find online. I could almost hear the conversations he had with his colleagues, the way they would regard him with a mix of pity and disdain. There was no escaping the consequences of their choices, and I felt strangely hollow witnessing the destruction of their lives. Despite the initial rush of power I had felt in orchestrating their downfall, I now grappled with a realization: their suffering did not restore what I had lost. My heart ached with the knowledge that revenge had not brought me the closure I had sought. Instead, it had only served to deepen my sense of isolation and despair. As I reflected on my choices, I found myself longing for the days when I was simply Tom, a husband who loved his wife. I was no longer sure what I wanted. Watching Emily lose everything, a job she had worked so hard for, the respect of her peers, and the love of her husband, made me question if I had truly won. The emptiness in my chest felt heavier than ever, and I realized that the revenge I had orchestrated had stripped us both of our humanity. I was left with a decision: to continue down this path of destruction or to seek a way forward that did not involve further pain. As I turned away from my screen, feeling the weight of my choices pressing down on me, I knew I needed to find a new direction. The thrill of revenge had faded, leaving only a void that I could no longer ignore. As the days passed, I found myself engulfed in an internal struggle that left me feeling more lost than ever. The initial thrill of revenge had quickly faded, leaving behind a chilling emptiness that I could no longer ignore. I had envisioned a sense of relief, a cathartic release from the pain that Emily's betrayal had inflicted on me. Instead, I was left with a heavy weight in my chest, a gnawing awareness that my actions had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond the lives of Emily and Mark. Every time I glanced at my phone, I was met with reminders of the chaos I had unleashed. News reports, social media posts, and gossip among our mutual acquaintances painted a vivid picture of their suffering. Emily's colleagues whispered about her fall from grace, their pity evident in their hushed tones. Mark, once confident and assured, now wore a mask of defeat. The fallout from my actions not only affected them, it rippled out to their friends, families, and colleagues, all of whom were caught in the crossfire of a scandal that had escalated beyond my control. As I absorbed the pain of others, a profound sense of guilt began to take root within me. I realized that my desire for revenge had transformed into a weapon that inflicted harm on innocent bystanders, people who had nothing to do with our fractured relationship. I could see the hurt in their eyes, the confusion and despair that my actions had ignited. The realization struck me hard: my quest for vengeance had only perpetuated a cycle of suffering, and I was the one at the center of it all. The internal conflict raged on, and I found myself grappling with the question of what kind of person I had become. I had prided myself on being a rational, logical individual, yet here I was, succumbing to the darkness of my anger. I had convinced myself that I was justified in my actions, that exposing Emily and Mark was a way to reclaim my dignity. But as I reflected on the fallout, I recognized the truth: I was not the hero of this story, I was the villain. In quiet moments, I would replay memories of our life together, moments of laughter, shared dreams, and whispered promises. It was hard to reconcile those memories with the reality of betrayal that had shattered my world. I longed to remember the love we had built, but it felt as if the anger had eclipsed everything else. The conflict within me deepened as I tried to navigate the thin line between pain and resentment, and it left me feeling exhausted. Amidst the turmoil of my thoughts, a realization began to take shape: I could not continue down this path of destruction. My focus on revenge had consumed me, draining me of the vitality I once possessed. Instead of empowering me, it had only served to isolate me further. I needed to reclaim my life, not just from the wreckage of my marriage, but from the grip of vengeance that had ensnared me. The decision was not easy, and it came with a mix of fear and hope. I could no longer allow my identity to be defined by the pain Emily had caused. It was time to shift my focus from what I had lost to what I could still regain. I realized that while the scars of betrayal would remain, I had the power to reshape my future. I began to envision a life beyond the chaos, one where I could find solace in new beginnings. I thought about my passions, the things that had once brought me joy before betrayal overshadowed everything. I remembered my love for programming and how it had served as an escape, a way to channel my creativity. Perhaps I could pour my energy into developing new skills and pursuing opportunities that would allow me to grow rather than stagnate in bitterness. With this newfound clarity, I started to draft a plan for my future. I imagined enrolling in programming courses to expand my knowledge and push myself to reach new heights professionally. I thought about reconnecting with old friends, those who had been sidelined in the chaos of my marriage. It was time to re-establish connections and build a support system that would help me navigate the challenges ahead. The thought of focusing on myself, on healing and self-discovery, brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that I needed to forgive, not only Emily but also myself for allowing anger to consume me. It was a heavy burden to bear, and releasing it would be the first step toward moving on. I understood that forgiveness did not mean excusing her actions. It meant freeing myself from the shackles of resentment that had held me captive. As I took a deep breath and embraced this new mindset, I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me. I had the power to redefine my narrative, to transform the pain of betrayal into a catalyst for growth. It was time to step away from the shadows of revenge and into the light of possibility. I resolved to move forward, not just for my own sake but as a testament to my resilience. The journey ahead would be challenging, but I was determined to reclaim my life and build a future where I could find happiness again. After months of turmoil and inner conflict, I finally reached a turning point, a moment where clarity washed over me like a soothing tide. I stood at a crossroads, and I knew that clinging to the past would only weigh me down. It was time to leave everything behind and focus on my own goals and personal development. The pain of betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and, most importantly, myself. I was ready to embark on a new chapter in my life, one that I hoped would be filled with healing and growth. As I contemplated my future, I reflected on the mistakes I had made and the anger that had consumed me for so long. The desire for revenge had nearly devoured me, but I realized that it had also illuminated the areas of my life that needed change. I had poured so much energy into my feelings of hurt and betrayal that I had neglected my passions and ambitions. It was time to redirect that energy toward positive pursuits. I began to set clear goals for myself, focusing on areas where I had always wanted to grow. I enrolled in programming courses to deepen my knowledge and skills, hoping to reignite my love for technology and creativity. Each lesson felt like a step toward reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost in the aftermath of my marriage's collapse. I immersed myself in coding, finding joy in solving problems and creating something tangible from my efforts. It was invigorating, and slowly but surely, I felt my confidence returning. In addition to pursuing my professional goals, I recognized the importance of nurturing my relationships. I reached out to old friends, those connections that had faded during my time with Emily. Rebuilding these friendships filled my life with laughter and support, reminding me that I was not alone in this journey. I learned to cherish the moments spent with people who uplifted me, and it felt liberating to have a support system in place. However, amidst my pursuit of personal development, I knew that I needed to confront the past one last time. I realized that true healing would require closure, not just for me but also for Emily. I decided to reach out to her, to have an open and honest conversation that would allow us both to fully let go of the pain that had marred our relationship. We met at a small cafe, the atmosphere filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and pastries. It felt surreal to be sitting across from her after everything that had happened. I was nervous, unsure of how this conversation would unfold. But as I looked into her eyes, I recognized the remnants of the love we once shared. A love that had been overshadowed by betrayal and hurt. "Emily," I began, my voice steady but gentle, "I think we need to talk about everything that happened between us. I want to understand your perspective, and I hope we can find some kind of closure." She nodded, her expression a mix of sadness and resignation. "I've thought a lot about our relationship too. Thomas, I know I hurt you, and I wish I could take it back. But I also have to be honest with myself about what I want." As we talked, the conversation flowed freely, each of us sharing our feelings and experiences. Emily spoke about her choices, her regrets, and her feelings of guilt. I listened, allowing her words to wash over me, absorbing her pain without judgment. I could see that she, too, was struggling with the aftermath of our relationship. I realized that our love was real, but it was also flawed. I said, "I need to accept that. I can't keep holding on to anger or resentment. I want to move on, and I hope you do too." At that moment, something shifted. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from our shoulders. We acknowledged the hurt we had caused each other, but we also recognized that it was time to let go. Emily, with tears in her eyes, expressed her understanding of my pain. I could see that she had truly reflected on her actions, and I felt a flicker of compassion for her. As our conversation drew to a close, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. We had reached a mutual understanding, a place where we could both release the pain of the past and begin anew. While Emily remained firm in her decisions and beliefs, I accepted that I could no longer control how she felt. Instead, I focused on my journey. Leaving the cafe, I felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from my soul. I had found closure, and in doing so, I had unlocked the door to a brighter future. The anger that had once consumed me faded into the background, replaced by a sense of hope and determination. I was ready to embrace this new chapter in my life with open arms. With renewed purpose, I dedicated myself to personal growth. I spent time cultivating my passions, developing new skills, and surrounding myself with positive influences. I began to explore hobbies I had neglected, like painting and hiking, finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. Each day became an opportunity to rediscover who I was beyond the pain of betrayal. As I reflected on the journey that had led me here, I realized that the pain I had endured was not in vain. It has shaped me into a stronger, more resilient individual. I had learned valuable lessons about trust, love, and the importance of prioritizing my happiness. I took my first steps into this new beginning with a heart full of hope. While the scars of my past would always remain, I knew they would not define me. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, determined to build a life filled with purpose, joy, and genuine connections. As I moved forward, I carried with me the knowledge that I had emerged from the darkness, ready to create a brighter future, one that was truly my own. The only solace I found in my elaborate revenge plan was the sight of Emily's lover, Jake, struggling to regain his footing after the public humiliation I orchestrated. Despite his earlier arrogance, it was evident that the fallout had taken a toll on him. I would often hear whispers about his career, once promising, now reduced to a shadow of its former self. His confidence, once so apparent, seemed to have evaporated, leaving him with an air of desperation. Watching him grapple with the consequences of his actions offered me a sense of vindication, a feeling that, in some small way, justice had been served. As days turned into weeks, I found myself constantly checking social media and news outlets for updates on Jake. The thrill of seeing his downward spiral was a twisted kind of satisfaction. I remembered the way he had flaunted his relationship with Emily, the smugness that dripped from his every word. Now, he was being scrutinized by the very people who once looked up to him. The whispers of his fall from grace provided a bittersweet comfort, reinforcing the idea that my actions had not only impacted my life but had also shattered his illusion of success. However, as gratifying as it was to witness Jake's struggles, I soon realized that this joy was fleeting. The more I focused on his misfortune, the more I understood that my feelings were rooted in bitterness. His inability to bounce back became a reminder of the chaos that had engulfed my life. Despite the initial satisfaction, I found myself questioning the validity of my revenge. Did his suffering truly bring me peace? It was a hollow victory, and I began to grasp that my path forward could not be built on the misfortunes of others, no matter how deserving they seemed.